been biting my tongue for a while, but I couldn't really do it any longer after this weekend and the protection that Thomas Frank is getting in the media compared to what we saw with Ange Postecoglou last season. And bearing in mind, Ange Postecoglou is a manager that by the time we got to about March, April, and he had some players back who weren't starting to see signs of improvement despite what was happening in the Europa League, I wanted Ange gone. And I can hold my hands up and admit that. And I said that at the time. But he was getting hounded in the media for basically exactly the same, if not quite as bad of a situation as what we're going through with Thomas Frank right now. Henry Winter, these are the same journalists that are making excuses for Thomas Frank, that were pillaging Ange Postecoglou for basically the same thing. And actually, when you look at where we're at now, Tottenham are 6 points above the relegation zone. By the time we play Arsenal in a couple of weeks, we could end up on the same amount of points as West Ham. If we lose to Newcastle tomorrow, which, to be honest, I think we might get something. And there will be a preview coming out later on. And I'm sticking by this team. And I'm backing them to get out of this mess, right? Even though I have huge concerns about what's going on at the moment. Because I'm a fan and I really want to believe in this team. So there will be a preview out later, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss that. Also, if you've noticed the new channel branding, by the way, Ben Bowman THFC, we've renamed the name of the channel. This has always been just a Spurs channel, but I want to make that even more clear because there might be some general football stuff coming soon. I might be making a general football YouTube channel. So it's important to differentiate, right, guys, and keep the Tottenham branding strong. Tottenham, if we lose tomorrow to Newcastle, West Ham get a result against Man United tomorrow, or they beat them, and West Ham win their game before us on the Saturday before we play Arsenal, we could be going into that North London derby level on points with the Spammers. Last season, Tottenham finished on 38 points, lost 4 of our last 5 games, right? But we were 16 points above the relegation zone at this exact stage last season. And I was fearful of us getting dragged into it. And I think the main reason that didn't really happen is because of how poor these teams were. Leicester, Ipswich, and Southampton, right? This year, that is not the case. Leeds are on the up. Forest have had some decent results recently. West Ham are on the up. We gave them that shot in the arm. But Thomas Frank is escaping any criticism in the media. Disgraceful. To borrow one of Romero's words from his recent outburst, Romero's thoughts on Romero on Casemiro, Argentina on Brazil, always an edge and that is ridiculous. Dangerous follow-through deserving of the straight red. Can he remain captain in the future? Once again, Romero lets down teammates, fans and manager. Again, in isolation, I don't have an issue with much of what Henry Winter has said there. Heaps more pressure on Thomas Frank. Odebear's sacrifice to enter the Dragosin. I mean, bro's trying to write a poem over here. Down to 10, Spurs now a goal down. Crazy from their captain. More pressure on Thomas Frank, but how can he be responsible for Romero getting banned for 4 games for a bad challenge? Amazingly, some people arguing it wasn't a red. And a doggy limping off with another injury. Frank without Maddison, Kulusevski, Kudus, Porro, Richarlison, Bentancur, Davis, Spence and Danso. 100 injuries across Premier League clubs at the moment, and Spurs are especially badly hit. All of the excuses in the world for Thomas Frank that are valid. Injury excuses are valid. But Ange Postecoglou was almost blamed for them for a long period of last season. I think some Spurs fans, we also got caught up in that as well because of the type of football that we played. And I probably at points also blamed Ange for the injuries in the way that we played, you know, especially for players like Mickey van der Ven, etc. And not solely blaming Ange, but I'm just saying that his style of football would have had something to do with that. That is kind of what a lot of line of thinking was from journalists, from fans last season who were sick and tired of seeing the injuries that we were kind of getting because of the way that we played, even though we didn't necessarily play with the same intensity in the second half of the season as in the first half of the season, right? But those injuries have remained this season. They've still been very bad. Maybe not been quite as bad in context because Ange didn't have Romero or Van der Ven basically available for half of the season. You know, having to play Gray and Dragosin at the back, we've at least had Van der Ven basically available the entire time, right? And Romero and Ange would have absolutely killed for that. So the same things, Thomas Frank is not being held to the same standards as what Thomas Frank is being... Oh, sorry, the other way around. Thomas Frank is not being held to the same standards that Ange Postecoglou was last season. I think a lot of this is to do because Thomas Frank has done a lot of media work. Punditry, he's a nice guy, you know, kind of clean-cut image, those kind of things. Isn't going to say anything too controversial. Isn't going to necessarily bite back at journalists in press conferences, etc. And because he came from Brentford, where he's been in the Premier League a long time, it's an amazing story what Matthew Benham has achieved at Brentford and all those kind of things. It's great. And Thomas Frank kind of obviously did amazing work in that. Whereas Ange Postecoglou came in with an arrogance and a swagger of, I'm going to play my kind of football and it's going to work. And it worked at times, it didn't work at others. And I still maintain that moving on from Ange Postecoglou at the end of the season was probably the right decision. Right? Was probably the right decision. I got to the point around March, April last year. I remember it was around the AZ Alkmaar first leg where I was like, you know what? He's got the players back. This is dire, right? But it was also clear that the priority was winning that Europa League last season, and the league did take a backward step. Now, as a Spurs fan who is a season ticket holder, who goes and supports this club home and away, I find it very difficult to check out from the league games, even though I know we're not going to get relegated, and I know the Europa League is where our eggs are in that basket, if that makes sense, last season, right? I was still getting very angry and very annoyed with losing every week because it becomes a habit, and then you take it into the following season, etc., 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 etc. So that's why I wanted Ange Postecoglou to go. When Europa League came round and when he navigated us to that final, we were more pragmatic, etc., etc., and he won it, I was in favour of keeping him. I was also in favour of rolling the dice and going with Thomas Frank because I trusted Thomas Frank. I thought he was going to be much better than he has been. And with the way that Thomas Frank has been bigged up in the media before he moved to Tottenham, the amount of journalists, the amount of neutral media that was saying it's such a smart appointment for Spurs, and that was my line of thinking as well. I can hold my hands up and say that I got it wrong. I'm not still here waving the flag for Thomas Frank, right? And I'm a fan who, I was optimistic about it. I was behind it. I thought it was a really good appointment. But I think it became quite apparent quite quickly when we got to sort of November that this isn't going to work at Tottenham. This is not going to work. He's not brave enough. He's not aggressive enough. He hasn't got that feel of what a Tottenham manager necessarily should be. And I think I started to feel that after the Arsenal game and then into the Fulham game, where it was unacceptable the amount of times that we were losing at home. And the excuses that are made for him weren't being made for Ange Postecoglou at the time. And it's frightening. I think there was more people, he says here, this is the 10th of April, this was after the Chelsea game, right? Well, I was very, very angry after that Chelsea game, right? No identity, no unity, minimal attacking threat, players losing discipline. Is that not the case this season? No identity. How on earth are we meant to be playing? We knew what we wanted to do under Ange Postecoglou, but we weren't doing it last season. No unity. You can't tell me that these players and manager are necessarily together. Minimal attacking threat. How often do we actually look like scoring goals and applying pressure to teams? Players losing discipline. You've still got that this season. And Romero's red card at the weekend. And look, I said it in my videos over the last couple of days when I was talking about Romero, and I did a video on Romero yesterday and the media narrative around that. And the thing that I sympathise with Romero to an extent, is because I feel like all of the talk around him is distracting from what the big issue is. And that is Thomas Frank. The results are absolutely unacceptable. The performances have been getting slightly better, but still unacceptable. The club bottled the chance to sack him, in my opinion. Maybe is that because they're lining Pochettino up for the summer and they're just going to give it a go with Frank to the end of the season and hope he turns it around. That's playing a very dangerous game in itself. I think now they've got to the point where I'm not sure if they can sack him. I don't know who's available at this point of the season. Now we've got further into the mire would come after he didn't navigate us through what was a much easier period of games than what we've got coming up. Newcastle, despite their poor away form, Arsenal, etc. Fulham, we've got to go away from home to them, and they've been playing well recently as well. All of the excuses that are being made for Frank were not being made for Ange. And that is a fact. And I sympathise with Thomas Frank after Saturday. I genuinely did, because Romero did let him down. He 100% let him down. It was poor. And I thought we looked better in the first 15, 20 minutes of the game. I think the game plan was there. And then Romero goes and gets sent off and it all goes in the bin. It all goes on the scrap heap. But Romero doing that is almost the best possible thing for Thomas Frank, because once again, the blame will be laid away from his door. And I can take the blame being laid away from his door after this game in isolation. I can take that. But when you're watching Tottenham at home to Man City last week in that first half, despite what was a really good comeback in that second half to get a point, a really important point, can you tell me what our identity was under Thomas Frank then? Because I can't. So if you're going to blame it all on the players now, they've got some good players. And I'm using Harry Winter as an example, right? But I've seen so many other journalists on Match of the Day, on Sky Sports News, on TalkSport or whatever, stick up for Thomas Frank. And the words that are often used are, I feel sorry for him. I feel sorry for Thomas Frank. Look at the players. They're not good enough. The recruitment wasn't good enough. The owners aren't good enough. That's a valid reason. But even they're not really copying that much stick at the moment. It seems to be all about Romero and all about the fact that he's not got a very good group of players and he inherited a squad that finished 17th last season. But Thomas Frank's job was to come in and stabilise us. And he's not shown anything capable, really, of doing that over a long period of time so far. Spurs have won 2 games in the Premier League since October. Can't all be about the players. I'm not saying it's all on Thomas Frank either. But when the portioning of blame in the media isn't getting fairly divided. And this is why I got annoyed about all the Romero comments in the week as well, because they so obviously missed the mark on how Tottenham fans actually feel about Romero, because he is the only one that's actually speaking up for us and reflecting how we truly feel. That's not just about the manager, that's more about the club. But Tottenham fans' thoughts on Thomas Frank are not being listened to. Fans have clearly had enough of him. This was on April the 3rd after the Chelsea game when Ange cupped his ears to the fans, and I was done with him at that point. I really was. I was done with him at that point. But I think there are more Spurs fans now that are done with Frank compared to compared to Ange then. And that was closer to the end of the season when we knew we weren't going to get relegated. And we knew we were going to finish 17th, but we knew we weren't going to go down. It would have taken a miracle for us to go down at that point. We're in far more danger now, but all of a sudden, for some reason, Thomas Frank isn't copping any of the blame. We understood, really, that Ange Postecoglou, whether rightly or wrongly, put all of the eggs in the Europa League basket, right? He is still trying in the league and ultimately failing, Thomas Frank, to get us out of this situation. Yes, there have been slightly more green shoots recently, but the reality is the situation is getting worse. It's getting more precarious. And maybe it's because Ange Postecoglou last season, despite the fact that Spurs finished 5th in his first season the year before, Spurs had always been a European side that finished in Europe. And I think that's what always gets forgotten around the narrative in the media, little old Tottenham. And I feel like Frank has almost maybe reaped benefit of the fact that Ange last season brought Spurs down to a level domestically that the media want us to be, even though we're not that. That was a huge anomaly for Spurs in the last 20, 25 years to finish 17th in the Premier League. A huge anomaly. But the way the media speak about us, you wouldn't think that is the case whatsoever. So it's almost like Frank is being the beneficiary of a sort of faux normalisation of what Spurs actually are, when that is not the case whatsoever. Because the club don't have those ambitions. The club keeps saying that they want to win the Premier League and the Champions League. And I don't really know what Thomas Frank's plan is to get out of this, despite the fact that, yes, there have been slightly more green shoots recently. And just because, what Henry Winter is saying here, or so was saying last year, wasn't necessarily wrong, because I agreed with him. But please, for the love of God, these guys need to stop sticking up for Thomas Frank and not holding him to the same standards that they were with Ange Postecoglou last season. And maybe this isn't a helpful thing to say at this time, and maybe all our energy should be channeled into supporting the team. But I was there in that away end at Man United on Saturday, and I'll tell you now, these fans are behind this team. They really, really are. That was one of the best away ends I've been in all season. I reckon at least 50-60% of the fans, after the full-time whistle, stayed for about 5 minutes, 10 minutes to clap those players and clap the manager as a symbol to say, we are still here, we are sticking by you. And Thomas Frank has come out today and said we need the fans tomorrow massively. And again, he's not wrong for saying this, but you need to show us something, because we are here, we are not going away. We are not going away at all. We might be getting dragged further into this, but we will not back down. We will support the team. The home atmosphere is always a little bit more different, and that is where it needs to improve. But even look at Man City last week. When we saw something to get behind, those fans are there. We have not seen anywhere near enough to get behind. And we're still somehow the ones that are getting the blame. Not necessarily from Frank in this instance, but, the media. Spurs fans have too high standards. You finished 17th last year. What do you expect? Blah, 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 blah. We're being gaslit by the club on a regular basis, and we know our level of expectation should be higher than this based on our league finishes over the last 20 years. We don't think big and dream big for absolutely no reason, because we got close to these things. Pochettino getting us to a Champions League final in 2 title races, consistently finishing in the top 4, FA Cup semi-finals. We won a Europa League last year. Why is that not being spoken about? Because the teams that we beat on the way to that run, other teams have struggled against, Bodo Glimt, etc. Not so much Frankfurt, but Bodo Glimt, but it's always used as a stick to beat Tottenham with and patronise. You finished 17th last year. What did you expect? It's unacceptable, the difference in standards in terms of what Thomas Frank is being held to compared to Ange. And this isn't me doing revisionism on Ange, right? Because, like I said at the start of the video, I think it was a right decision to move on from him. If you ask me now, Would I turn back time and instead of giving Thomas Frank the job, would I have given Ange Postecoglou season 3? Yeah, I probably would have done because I also wanted to at the time and I made that clear. I was up for giving it a go, but I thought it was probably the right decision to move on. That's not me just playing both sides so that whatever thing I can turn back and say I was right or I was wrong. That's me being in the middle, as many Spurs fans were, of a difficult, emotional decision because of what Ange Postecoglou was able to achieve with us and the feeling that it gave us. We feel nothing supporting this team right now because there is nothing to get behind. With Ange, there was always the thing of what if, because we actually saw his football click and work for longer periods than we did under Thomas Frank. And I'm behind this team right now. And I don't know what would happen if Spurs sacked Thomas Frank tomorrow. I still think we should get rid of him, but I think the club aren't. And I've kind of made peace with that, right? And I kind of want to channel the energy I've got into supporting the team. But I can't ignore this for much longer because this weekend, with all the Romero stuff, it's come to a head even more. And the double standards are absolutely crazy. And I just think it's a wider reflection of how Tottenham are patronised and how we are reported on in the media. We are not allowed to have expectations. We are not allowed to have standards, apparently. We're not allowed to think that we're better than Thomas Frank. Oh, poor Thomas Frank. Look at the injuries that he's got. Look at the injuries that we had last season. It was probably worse than what we're going through right now. Marginally, it's not that much different, right? But it was all blamed at Ange's doorstep. The football wasn't sustainable, blah, 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 blah. I don't know what our football is now. At least Ange had a plan A. He had no plan B. But Thomas Frank, I don't think, has a plan A, really. And again, like I said, there have been slightly better green shoots in recent weeks. But I do think that Frank is benefiting from the fact that in the media's eyes, Ange Postecoglou brought Spurs down to the level domestically that they want us to be. The media want us to be. And I hate getting all tin hat and conspiracy and all this kind of rubbish, but that is how I feel. And it is so, so frustrating. Let's see if we can get out of this. I really hope we can. And I will be supporting this team, and I'm not going anywhere. Tomorrow's a massive game. There'll be a preview out on it later. But I can't let this go on for much longer without it being spoken about. Spurs fans are not being heard in the media whatsoever. We are being constantly patronised, and our manager is not being held to the same standards that a manager last season, who they clearly didn't like, who rubbed the media up the wrong way because he wasn't afraid to back himself and wasn't afraid to challenge them and wasn't afraid to put his balls on the table and say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to win this Europa League. And you lot will laugh at me when I come out and say I always win things in my second season. They don't like that. I don't like that confidence and arrogance. They like people like Thomas Frank who are more company men, they're more corporate men. And I don't want to get personal on Thomas Frank. I've got nothing against the guy personally. I'm sad that it didn't work because I went really big on him and I thought he was the right guy. But I cannot sit and listen to uninformed, uneducated people in the media around Tottenham's situation who are telling us how we should feel and are not listening to us about this manager who I reckon has a 5% at most approval rating within the fan base, which Ange Postecoglou's, despite how toxic it got in around April time with the Fulham game and the Chelsea game and all that, it still would have been higher at that point. I guarantee you. I guarantee it. So it's really frustrating. It's really, really frustrating. The Newcastle preview will be out later tonight. I've got some hope. Can we go and do this? I really feel like... I do feel like the players are trying. And I feel like Frank is trying to find solutions. It's not working. But why is he not being held to account for that in the media? I don't mean to be purposely... I'm not trying to be toxic in this video by putting this video out here. I just can't sit here and listen to constant protection of a manager that is not doing enough. Look at Eddie Howe. I know Eddie Howe's been here 5 years at Newcastle, right? But look at the way that he comes out and takes accountability for his situation at the moment. We're not seeing that at the moment, and it's so frustrating. I'll see you in the next video. Make sure to subscribe to the Ben Bowman THFC channel, and up the Spurs.